Hello, I'm Simon, and this is a way too deep investigation into the Muppets band Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem. For the sake of the argument, I'm going to talk about what if the band were real people in the real world, when the band would have been created, where they would be placed on the musical timeline, what's the sound world, and what's the aesthetic between MTV and hippie. The origin of Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem, while in the lore of the story isn't really explained, in the real world they came about in 1975 to coincide with the Muppet Show. The other evidence that is given to us in terms of where they'd be placed time-wise is in the show that came out earlier this year, 2023. They stated that they had been on a 40-year-long tour, and also during that they had not been releasing music, which is interesting because it's quite the opposite of the Beatles. Now looking into the individual band members. Dr. Teeth has inspirations based on Dr. John and Elton John. This places him in the singer-songwriter genre along with soul, jazz, funk, and a little bit of rhythm and blues. Next is Janis, who plays guitar for the band. Based on Janis Joplin, it's also where her name came from, so a lot of folk and psychedelic influences. Next is Floyd, who is the bass player for Dr. Teeth and Electric Mayhem, which is inspired by John Lennon. Also, his name comes from the band Pink Floyd, his last name Pepper from the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's album. Next is Zoot, based on Zoot Sims, who's the saxophone player for the band, which has a lot of those jazz and bluegrass elements. Lips, who plays the trumpet, based on Louis Armstrong. Once again, those jazz elements. And last, but certainly not least, is Animal, who is based on the drummer from The Who and Led Zeppelin. Overall, these members paint a clear image of the 1970s. So the instrument-wise, we have the rock band along with the saxophone, the trumpet, and the piano/synth. The use of the synth also really places this band into the 1970s. There's also the group of artists and many singers that often use vocal harmony, which also kind of places it into the 70s due to this mix of music and this fusion. Specifically, there happens to be a character in the Muppet Show I previously mentioned, the new one, named Moog, probably based on the Mini Moog, spelled the same way. In general, the band is not worried about profits. There's several episodes in the Electric Mayhem show where there's a lot of pressure for them to worry about profits, and that's not something they had been worried about, which places them more towards the hippie aesthetic. Also, sonically, it's a lot of bass-forward music, which once again places it in that 1970s era. Now looking at the individual tracks based on their album release from the show Dr. Teeth and Electric Mayhem. Starting with Gotta Be, it has the bass-forward intro and is riff-based music. It then begins to build with the addition of the organ, which is more likely going to be the Mini Moog. It also features lots of horn hits from the saxophone and trumpet, and duet between Dr. Teeth and Floyd. The lyrics actually say something in the context of the show, which separates it from pop and dance music. It also has electric guitar in the background with the bass and the horns in front, which really places that in the 1970s era with a lot of influence and roots from rhythm and blues and also experimental jazz. The next one, to be brief, is the song Gonna Get There. Most notably, this song features the use of the sitar, which is very indicative of the psychedelic era in the late 1960s. The next song is the song We Are One. It opens with a guitar solo, and it has the horns in the foreground, which really has that rhythm and blues element to it. Also, with the namesake of We Are One, it's about community, which connects back to the psychedelic era. Also, throughout the song, there's lots of virtuosity, which once again connects it to that hippie aesthetic. Next is Believe in Us, which starts with just Dr. Teeth with the piano, and then builds. It has a very singer-songwriter-like intro. It also features background vocals. And there's also the saxophone and electric guitar solo, which once again shows that virtuosity of the hippie aesthetic. Also notably, on what wouldn't have been on their album, is a song called Makin' Mayhem, which is when in the show they had attempted to go with an overproduced route, very Phil Spector-like, and it was an attempt to come into this new era of music. The band disliked it. It was not their style, and it was deemed too cookie cutter, and they weren't allowed to be authentic, which once again ties it into that hippie aesthetic. They also had several covers on this album, which are important to mention, such as All You Need Is Love by the Beatles. But the main difference is that it doesn't have that ending eclectic noise. In reality, it's probably just to make it more palatable to listen to. It'd probably be the same in the Muppets world. Next is Rock and Roll All Night by Kiss. Then True Colors, which is a little bit different in their version of acoustic guitar opening by Janis, and cuts with vocals and a lot of vocal harmonies. And there's like some addition of soft drums and a saxophone solo. Next is Have a Little Faith in Me by John Hiatt, which is the singer-songwriter genre. Joined Together by The Who, Bridge Over Troubled Water by Paul Simon, and God Only Knows by the Beach Boys. In conclusion, while a completely fictitious band, Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem would have formed around the early to mid-60s, being heavily influenced by the folk music movement after the fall of rock and roll in the 50s. It can also be assumed, based on the stylization of specifically Dr. Teeth, that he's kind of balding whenever he is created. He's been part of that first generation of rockers. They fall under that hippie aesthetic, not concerned about image, and it's all exploration of self through music, and once again, that authenticity. They do what they want, regardless of what fans may want, what people want, what the record label may want. Also, image-wise, we have Janis, who's very Flower Child-based, and they travel around in a hippie van, which very much places that in the 1970s. The last lingering question is, if in the real world, would they have played at Woodstock? And I think that yes. While Disney places the family-friendly image on them, Dr. Teeth would definitely hit some LSD.